Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the wonderful Jessica Matten to talk all about her AMC Plus series, Dark Winds. And the first thing I was interested in talking about a little bit is the time period, because you're telling this story that's set in the 70s. And with your character in particular, there's obviously so many elements which impact her that are completely timeless, and no matter when the show was set, would still impact her as a character in this space in her world. And at the same time, there's certain things that are more compounded, how the world views her externally and how they treat her is obviously more heightened in the 70s than it would be at this point, even though there's still elements of that kind of like the timelessness aspect as well. And so I was interested in how that informed certain ways and certain details that you saw yourself shaping into Bernadette as a character because of the time period specifically of the setting.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. Like this is one thing I love about Bernadette and Dark Winds is I think any woman that watches her role in this show will relate in some aspect, whether it is in the 1970s or right now in the present. So I feel like I was obviously able to just draw from personal experience. Obviously, when you have careers outside of just acting, it gives you this kind of life experience that you could draw from. And I think that's just what I did. I used to work in offices all the time. And I knew then, being a young woman, what it was like to just have these, it felt like triple obstacles against you. And it actually had nothing to do with the color of my skin per se. It was just the fact that I was a woman. And so when I was portraying Bernadette, I thought a lot about that. And I drew from internally, what was I feeling at that time? So and like you said, it's compounded. This is in the 70s, again, when women's rights and all of that was just beginning. And then you're also so I drew from that. And then I also did a lot of research because I'm very passionate about the American Indian movement. And for those who don't know, it was known as AIM. And that was more or less like the Black Power movement. It was Native Americans fighting for their rights, for basic human rights, like clean water, access to public health care, public education, resources to build in proper homes, and yet they were seen as terrorists. So this was set, Dark Winds was set in the 70s, which was right during that period in time. So then you're also dealing with the fact that as a Native woman, you're seen as a terrorist in a lot of ways to the United States of America. So I was thinking of that too. Okay, there's all these compounded factors at play here. So what would a strong, resilient Indigenous woman during that period do? What would she do? She would stand tall, because that's all one can do, I believe. And I think that's with any person of strength, is you have to tune everything out and just know your truth. So that was literally the internal dialogue that not like I'm a crazy person having conversations with myself, but you kind of do. Like that's part of your research of this is the internal dialogue that I was constantly reminding myself and being reflective of when I was more or less, I guess, helping to shape Bernadette.
Yeah, and I love that description that you gave just there about standing tall, because when you look at the way that she cedes her power, or kind of stays true to convictions and things that she knows to be true, waiting for other people to kind of come onto that side of truth as well. It's not about saying it louder. It's just about, there's a real stillness and ferocity to the strength that she carries. And so was that research and kind of making that very specific choice of it's about standing tall for her, where a lot of that kind of quiet stillness of the confidence came from in her as a character as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I know there's like some Hollywood stereotypes of like the stoic Indian. I get that. But then the other thing about some stereotypes is they exist for a reason. So sometimes I feel there's the right places to play into that. And honestly, it's just, again, stereotype or not, I think when anyone stands in their power like that, it's that saying less is more. So speaking less and, just doing it through your body language, I think that's key to what true power looks like as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that as well is also the fact that we're witnessing this character in her workplace, and that's a different setting to if we were seeing her home all the time. And the majority of it is who she is in the field. And obviously she has to be a very specific type of person. She has to kind of be able to shut everything down around her to focus on the job at hand. And how did that influence the way that you were building her and creating this real undercurrent in her, where there's a lot of things that maybe we're not seeing in her day to day, we're not seeing her talking about, but you're still expressing all of those aspects of who she is within that particular setting of the story?
Thank you for this, because I'm actually going to explain, and thank you for giving me the space, by the way. I actually saw, and I usually don't look at review things, but this is like the first big Native American drama show. So I saw this review, and it was a bunch of these men who are obviously not Native, that do not understand how tribal police operate. And they will cover, miles and miles and miles of land. It's not like your typical police force where you're just, parading, not parading, but like covering one area of a city. It doesn't work like that. And they were like, that's not believable. And I'm like, honey, you've clearly never been to a native reserve, because that is how it is. On top of it, here's an interesting fact is, so in Canada, we have what's called the RCMP, which is like the FBI equivalent. And in order for RCMP to become qualified and certified in what they do, they're actually sent to isolated Native communities and put through what's called like an intensive training program of 6 months, because what they will see in 6 months up in a Native reserve is what a police officer will see in their lifetime. That's how violent it is. That's how many issues that we're still facing and overcoming through our healing process of what happened with the residential schools and the boarding schools. And it's a very hard thing to explain that we have third world living conditions within our developed nations in Canada, the United States. We don't have clean drinking water up there. To have a little space of fruit and vegetables, and I'm talking like a table worth of that at a grocery store, is phenomenal, because it costs so much money to get that to these communities. I'm talking like, I've seen an apple for $19. I've seen a rotten moldy bell pepper in a plastic thing for $15. So if I can't even afford that on a daily basis, how on earth do I expect people who don't have money to afford that too? And these are my people. So all of this and my life experience is what I compounded into Bernadette and her being a tribal officer. And it helps too that I know tribal officers in real life and female ones too. And, I just felt like I made Bernadette even more tough, unapologetically tough. And that is one thing I want to show, because again, I always reflect back to women. We are apologetic by nature. And it's weird how we do that to ourselves, because if we're too confident, if we stand too much in our power, then all of a sudden we're seen as like, oh, she thinks she's arrogant, blah, blah, blah. It's like, why? No, you could be kind and humble and compassionate and all these things, but also be okay to stand in what you've worked so hard to build in your life. So this is Bernadette. And honestly, I do draw a lot from life experience and watching other women in my life. I think that's key. You're an observer, right?
And is that also a lot of where the physicality of the character stemmed from as well? Because obviously, it's carrying through in her demeanor and in her characteristics, but it's also in the way that she holds herself and the way that you in turn are holding yourself in your performance in a lot of scenes.
Yeah, I learned through one of our Navajo writers on Dark Winds, Razal Benali, that in Dene culture, they actually have 5 different terms for, you could be a person, I'm going to get it super wrong, but you could be a person who is female, who has masculine traits, a male who has feminine traits, and then you have non-binary, and you have all these different kinds, very much like how it is. We have all the proper names and terms, and we're all coming into that understanding. But I wanted Bernadette to be accessible to everyone. So even, not just people who identify as cisgender, I wanted everyone to identify with Bernadette, because I think we all have a bit of her in us. And I just thought, my thinking is like, I know I'm the actor, but I'm always like, how can I make this about the audience? Like, how can I make this relatable? Because, there's so many shows these days. I get it. It's like, how do you get someone's attention? And I was like, I just always, everything I do in my life, including the characters, I want it to be relatable, something that people are like, get fired up about because they want that in themselves. So that's all I'm doing. I think about, what do I want myself? What do I think that, I hear that my friends in the audience would like to see. So that's why I made her the way she is. So, and people are always like, oh my God, Jess is not like that in real life. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just a big friendly giant. So
No, I love what you've built in this character as well. And also wanted to ask you, because I've heard you also say that for you really saw Bernadette as someone who had a lot of adeptness in code switching, particularly with the work that she's doing and, depending on who she's talking to. I was interested in what were some of those small nuanced details that you wanted to have kind of shift or change a little bit depending on what situation she was in and who she was talking to, with that code switching in mind for her as a character.
Yeah, so a big part of how natives are is our humor. And so when she's around her close friends and family, she's herself, right? So when she's around Joe Leaphorn's character or Emma Leaphorn, she's herself. So I wanted that to come through, where you see these little quirks that she has, and that she's actually funny and she's accessible. But when she's around people she doesn't like, and because of her line of work, I wanted to show that other side that a lot of natives do have. And it's not, you're not as accessible. You got intruders on your land, and also racism is a thing. I don't want to harp on that too much, but it's undeniable. It's something that I've grown up my entire life with, and it's only in the last, I would say, like 6 years where it's cool to be native now. It's cool to be who you are, and I love that so much. But all these elements, like I said, I draw from life experience, and I also with the code switching too. It's I'm mixed as well, and I was raised traditionally a lot in my native culture. I was raised on many different native reserves, but I wasn't born on a native reserve, and my family's extremely scattered too. And so I also, it's a detriment and a benefit at the same time, because I've been able to understand as an outsider sometimes when I felt that way, as well as an insider. And again, Bernadette is that, being a police officer, which was rare back then, I would, assume as a female, but also being a Navajo woman on top of it too.
Yeah. And you were talking there as well about the different sides of when she feels very relaxed, when she's comfortable, when she's with Joe, and that's someone that's a very familial person to her. And I really enjoyed the fact that we get to watch the dynamic as it evolves with Chee when he first joins the force and joins the team, that there are a lot of guardrails up, and she's not immediately going to give herself over and reveal things about herself. And even by her own admission says, I'm not very good at making small talk. So she's not telling him very much at the beginning. But then we do see those guardrails like really come down and soften. And so how did you calibrate and find, what are the turning points for her of trust? When is the point where she starts to really trust him and feel very comfortable in revealing more of herself? And what does that look like with someone new for her?
Yeah, it's again, this is, you hear sometimes with like actors and maybe not directors sometimes, but sometimes producers chime in too, of like how they want to see those emotional arcs happen. And I'm going to be honest, like in the first episode, when Bernadette is in the police station, and she, or I think it was the second episode, I'm sorry, I can't even remember my own show now, but there was a scene where she kind of like makes fun of something that she says, and she goes, and I honestly thought that was too immature for a grown woman to do that. And I didn't want that. And Chris Era, a wonderful director, also didn't want that take. But when you have, a lot of people that you are your boss and they want this to go a certain way, you don't really have a say. And I was like, okay, cool. I was like, and I'm just so trusting sometimes. I was like, all right. So I think about these things, and I'm like, how can I redeem Bernadette with that thing that I had to do, that, because you get protective as an actor of your characters. One thing I don't want to be is like precious and make a big deal on set. I'm not like that at all, but I just, I'll do my job, but I'll take that into consideration. So I remember of like, okay, how can I redeem her so that her, you know, Bernadette's still cool, she's still true and genuine, and she's still representing that powerful woman, because honestly, a powerful woman would not do that. So this, I'm giving you a little inside stuff too, because I think, you know, sometimes audience members too can feel it when it's like, oh, that's kind of like a weird choice, you know, and I'm totally not dissing anyone. I'm just kind of giving you the process of like, how it would go. But I felt it was, I had to work around that because, you know, we only have 6 episodes and there's only a few scenes where we develop Chee and Bernadette's relationship and stuff like that. So I just wanted, it was like a kind of like a steep curve for me. I'm kind of rambling because it was honestly, if anything, that was a bit of a challenge out of everything, you know, even though I'm like not giving too much away, but you know, beating some people up and everything, that was fine. The challenge was actually trying to find this love arc kind of quickly. I don't want to say love arc and give it away too much, but obviously this developing, budding thing from going from one extreme to the next. So I'm rambling because honestly, you know, you rely on beautiful, awesome, talented writers to help you out with that. And I think they did a great job of just like helping me as an actor to make sure that Bernadette touched these points with Chee, because I was like, oh, that's kind of like a steep curve as well. But again, I think it's about they found a way to relate to each other. They come from the same home. And yeah, am I answering your question? I feel like I'm rambling with that.
No, you're not rambling at all. And I love those sorts of details. And I'm glad that you were mentioning Chris Eyre as well, director on the series. And it sounds like it was a really collaborative environment in working with Chris. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about what that collaboration looked like. What was that kind of style that the two of you found with one another as collaborators? And what are some of the ways that the two of you really found some of the details of Bernadette together?
Yeah, so Chris Eyre he's pretty renowned and well respected and known in Indian country. And so I've known about him since I was a child, literally. I didn't know him personally, but I knew his film Smoke Signals. And that really helped to shape and put our people on the map in a very contemporary setting. So I don't think it's coincidence that he came onto this. And he's also helping to shape natives in another, you know, the 70s, still of a contemporary setting, as opposed to like what we're used to seeing, you know, like the teepees, the 1800s, etc. But when I saw his name attached and Zan, and then I was like, George R.R. Martin and Robert Redford. I was like, oh, Robert, oh, Bob. Yeah, I mean, who hasn't had a crush on Bob, you know? But when I saw George R.R. Martin, I was like, is there another George R.R. Martin, or is it that guy who did the stuff with the dragons? Like, I wasn't sure. I was actually confused. And, you know, it's like when you see these things, you're like, wait, is this for real or no? And, you know, Chris and I have some funny stories I should probably share. I don't even know if he remembers, but we had kept kind of in touch, but it was through Facebook, which I don't have anymore and I haven't had for years. And I was like, what's this guy about? And then we ended up working together on the show. And I just realized, oh my God, he's not only talented, but he's actually a genuine sweetheart. And he really is for the people. He's really about helping this generation of Native artists, as well as the generation before us, really succeed. And he's really big about, him and I have kind of the same ideals in terms of we're constantly thinking together, how can we move our people forward in cinema? How can we you know, stay true to our culture, but try to break away from what's been told before? I think there's the Tennessee Williams saying is we write what we know, something like that. And that always stuck in my head. And I always think about that. Obviously, you know, I'm doing most of the acting, not so much writing. But I make sure to apply that when I act. And I know Chris thinks about these things a lot. And he's also very cognizant of making sure that we break out of the mold. And so, yeah, it was just a good fit. It's a joy. But so why I'm rambling about this is it's very common in Indian country, as we call it, that we all kind of know each other or we know of each other. So the acting pool, I would say, for Native Americans is still quite small. And, and it takes time. I've been in this business for 12 years. And I think that's something important to share too, because, you do get these overnight successes, but the reality is a lot of us have been working for quite a long time. Zan, I think, is a great example. I think he's been in this business for 30 years, and he's finally just getting the lead of his own show. It's beautiful, and it's well deserved. I mean, the man could freaking act, and Chris too. It's just a joy for me to be a part of this and see other natives succeed, really and truly. I mean that. I'm not just saying it. Some people say that and they really don't mean it, but I do. I mean it. It's important.
Yeah. And with Zan as well, I love the relationship dynamic that the two of you created between Joe and between Bernadette, because, it's this professional partnership, but also this very personal partnership. And he's really a father figure to her in her life. And I thought that the two of you captured the essence of what that means. And even just there's so much silent communication and understanding between the two of them, which comes forth. And so how did the two of you set about finding what are the specific aspects that are going to come into their relationship in the workplace, with the fact that that's the relationship that they have outside of these doors, and it doesn't leave the moment that they step into the uniforms?
Here's the cool thing. When you get a chance to work with a really good actor, you don't even really with TV show, we move at such a fast pace. We don't have time to rehearse. So I knew that we would find a dynamic like that, and we did. So it's actually, with some things could be complicated, but this one's very simple. He's an incredible actor. We pay attention to one another, and you just bounce off of that energy. And it was very, very easy, because Zan and I are both nerds, and we do our homework and we study very hard. So we came to set prepared, and we already knew the dynamic. And it helped that, Zan and I have known each other for 7, 8 years now, because we did another show together called Frontier with Jason Momoa on Netflix. And actually, Jay is so loyal to the friends he meets in his life that he always wants to welcome them back onto his new shows. So he welcomes Zan back onto the show just for a couple of episodes, but that's when I met Zan. So and Zan and I always kind of kept in touch here and there, but again, Indian country so supportive that it just felt like I really was in the room with a good friend, and so we just built on that dynamic right on the spot like that.
That's amazing. And one of the other aspects in the show as well is some of the stunt work. And I know that with you, it's always very important to be able to do the majority of all of your own stunts, and this show being no exception. And it also sounds like that's something where even if you haven't got a project where you're going to have to do that, that's something that you're kind of always training and making yourself ready for. So I was interested in hearing a little bit about what that time in between projects looks like for you, in terms of some of the training that you always continue to do, and how that carried forth into this show with Bernadette, in terms of finding her specific style of movement as a character with what her skills and her training would be professionally, as well as how she moves as a character through the rest of the show, influencing that.
Yeah. So I came into this industry just giving acting a try. I Googled it, how to become an actor. I worked in advertising in London, England. And I worked at a land development company for 12 years prior. So I come from kind of just like a marketing background. So maybe that helped. But, the recession happened at the time. I was trying to move to New York. That failed. So I was like, oh, man. Well, I'm in Canada. I don't want to be in the town I'm in. What's in Vancouver? What's their main industry? Film. I was like, oh, okay. I read it. I was like, how to become an actor. I was like, oh, it says get headshots, find an agent. Okay. It didn't say anything about training. So my whole life I've been training. So my mother put me into sparring lessons when I was very young, different forms, Danjitsu, Purple Dragon, Ryu, which was a Caribbean form of training in Trinidad and Tobago. And Professor Don Jacob, the trainer there, was actually, our instructor was trained by Bruce Lee's instructor. So I'm not telling you, it's not like this, you could just cross over and get a white belt to yellow belt. Everyone had to be able to do the splits before they could even graduate from a white to yellow. Like, it was brutal. And, my brother went over to Trinidad and trained 13 hours a day. And just crazy weather. So we come from a very athletic family to begin with, which really helps. But also, I'm 5'10" pretty much. So when I was sparring competitively, they wouldn't put me in the girls category because I was too tall, and they said it wasn't fair. So they put me in the boys category, and I tied second place sparring. And growing up on tons of reserves, you kind of have to Indian kids are rough with each other. And, they would try to pick on me, and I would just kind of have to beat them down. So, and then, and I would beat them up, and then I'd be like, oh, I don't want to fight anymore. Like I always had that dynamic, but all of this, and this is what I teach, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm running a Native Film Academy and Stunt Combat Academy, and I'm really big on training the body and the mind. So I just brought this into acting when I decided to go into it, and I saw that there was a gap. That there wasn't a lot of Native actors, female actors that could fight, like truly fight. And so I just started training myself on my own. At the time I was starting off, I couldn't afford a trainer, none of that, but I would run on a treadmill almost every day. And when I did, I would be visualizing that I was training for the role of a Native warrior in TV or film. And, there is truth in manifestations. You make yourself feel it. You convince your body and your mind that it's happening, that it does exist. And lo and behold, my first big gig out of the gate was, playing a Native warrior. And then it's just kind of been a snowball of these cops. I played the lead character that I associated produced in Canada called Tribal, chief sergeant of a police force, and now there's Bernadette. One thing when you're filming, if you can do your own stunts, it's easier for the DP, the director, and it's just you. And as an actor, you could bring that energy. But mind you, I respect stunt people so much. Like, they are fearless. They're the ones that actually make actors look really good, because when an actor's like hitting, they're the one that reacts, right? So they're the one going, even though you're not even hitting them. Or if you hit them and it's like, a wussy kind of hit, and they're the ones selling it. So sometimes there was one stunt coordinator that he helps to train me. His name is Daniel, and he's like one of my best friends out of LA. He's French. And I barely touched him. He like backflipped over, and I was like, okay, that's a little exaggerated. But it's one thing with stunts though. I realized as an actor, we have to make sure that we're not getting overconfident, because there's so much you still need to learn. It's actually very, very dangerous. I mean, I've ended up in the emergency 3 times on different projects. I had caught COVID, and I did not, I lost my sense of taste, smell, but the weirdest thing happened. I lost my pain receptors. So I couldn't tell if I was injuring myself. So even in the show, I was doing my own stunts, and the next day I was so bruised and swollen from my favorite scene coming up in some of the episodes. I won't give it away, but I honestly, I couldn't even feel pain from it, but my body was like pretty beaten up. So yeah, it's an interesting thing.
It is. And it's so fascinating. And I love hearing all these details of all of the different aspects of everything that went into creating this character, because it's so much over the course of 6 episodes. And I've really loved watching the first season with everything that you've done. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. Appreciate it, Jessica.
Yeah. And I'm rambling like crazy today. Some interviews you're like rambling, and I'm like, why am I rambling right now? So
not at all. Yeah, it's all wonderful details.
Yeah. I just feel like you have like very like, like thought out questions. So it's connected to all these factors. So I was just like kind of sharing.
No, I loved it. Thank you so much.